Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Chernitsky. I'm a consultant at WICC with more than 20 years experience managing people and significant projects.
Hi, my name is Amy Postal. I'm a retirement consultant at Willis Towers Watson. I've been with WTW for about 10 years, and I'm really excited to be joining this conversation.
And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jim Trotier. I am a principal in Mercer's wealth business and have been working there for a little over a decade now. Have been managing people for a couple of years, but have been managed by people my whole career. So excited to be here and talk with everybody today. And with that, I think we can dive right into the first slide, Shannon. Thanks. So I'll help set the stage a little bit before turning it over to Sharon and Amy about our conversation today on year-end review. And I wanted to start by saying that year-end review is really a misnomer and is simply the culmination of a year-round process between employee and manager. So we know that many of you may have already had year-end conversations for 2022 with your managers, but still think there's a lot of value to be had in the conversation today as you start thinking about 2023. Because truly, the year-end review process starts at the beginning of the year when you're setting goals with your manager. You want to make sure you have the opportunity to align expectations at the beginning of the year. Not only do you need to establish that clear expectations from the start, but you're going to need to manage your progress throughout the year through regular check-ins with your people manager to make sure that things aren't going off the rails at any point. A topic you'll hear more about later in our conversation is understanding that the employee-manager relationship is really a two-way partnership, but that you're going to be responsible for owning your career. Nobody's going to take your life as seriously as you will. So if you have the opportunity to go through, set clear expectations, have some regular check-ins with your people manager throughout the year, it shouldn't be a surprise when you get to your year end. This isn't the time to all of a sudden realize I've been doing something wrong for the past 11 and a half months. Year end is not the time for surprises. By this point, you and your manager should have a good idea of what type of year you've had. So I've included some practical tips here that I've found have helped me and others I've worked with over the years as they prepare for year end throughout the year. So one idea is simply to set up an email folder that you keep separately and document any feedback you receive through the year, whether it's a nice email from a client or just an appreciative thank you from one of your colleagues. That way you have some reminders when you get to the year end of what you actually accomplished this year. From a cadence perspective, I found that roughly a monthly meeting with your manager is frequent enough so that you can course correct before anything goes off track, but also allows you some flexibility because we all know we're very busy. We might not have the opportunity to meet with our people manager every single week. Another topic you're going to hear more about later on is the idea that you do not have to completely rely on your people manager or assigned supervisor to support your career. Lots of people within any organization will be willing to help. Leaders love helping people. So one of the things we'll talk about more later on is identifying a sponsor or mentor outside of your directed supervisor to help your career. And really a last thing to keep in mind as you're preparing throughout the year is that your manager is going to have access to all the hard numbers they need. But what your responsibility is to help them tell your story. You want to be able to provide your managers with the context around your numbers so that they can really give a good perspective on what you accomplished during the year when they get to the year-end review. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sharon, who's going to talk a little bit more about the year-end review process in the broader context of a career management.
Thank you, Jim. So before I talk about self-assessments at year end, I want to share some statistics from two studies that were released that received a lot of press. And they show the difference in job applications between men and women. So the first one was an internal study done at Hewlett Packard in 2014, where Hewlett Packard looked at men compared to women when they were applying for positions. And they found that men were applying for positions if they met 60% of the requirements, but most women weren't applying unless they checked every box in the job description. LinkedIn followed up with a gender insights report 5 years later based on their website and the number of people who looked at job postings in 2018. Now, the universe of LinkedIn users in 2018 was 610 million worldwide, and they found that in general, women were much less aggressive in applying for positions. They were less likely to apply after viewing. If they had a referral, if they knew somebody at a company, they had a LinkedIn connection, they didn't approach that person, at least via LinkedIn, to ask for a referral. They did find a positive note is that women who did apply, who had the confidence to do that, were 16% more likely to be hired than men applying for the same job. And that percentage went up a little bit for senior roles. So I want to share two quick anecdotes about that really drive this point home. The first is I want to talk about a young woman who was a summer intern for the federal government this summer. And she enjoyed her position and wanted to look for an opportunity in the fall and found what she thought was the perfect job to apply to. It already had a lot of interest. It had 100 applications, but when she looked at the different criteria, the one thing she didn't have that they were looking for is she didn't speak Chinese. So she figured with the number of applications, there was no point in even applying, and she still had it in the back of her head, but decided not to move forward. But she mentioned it a couple of days later to her supervisor. Her supervisor encouraged her to apply, sharing, we get applications all the time with so many people who have almost none of the qualifications. That could be a deal breaker, but I don't know if it is or isn't, and you won't know unless you take the shot. She did. When the applications closed, there were almost 200 applications for 9 positions for that internship. And she was selected for one of them without so much as a follow-up interview. It was just her application alone that led to her selection. So again, Wayne Gretzky's quote on the right, really hits it home. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take. I also want to share that at our firm, at least, we have our employees give themselves a rating each year, and then the managers provide a rating. And I have worked with a number of men as direct reports who have consistently given themselves the very highest rating that was available. And I've never seen that in one woman who has ever reported to me. The women have tended to lack confidence. They want me to pull them up, where the men tend to want me to pull them down. And I think that's a very interesting dynamic as you go into the self-assessment season for the women who are attending today to understand, what I've observed and, what these statistics show. So next slide, please. We're going to start with a quick poll. As Shannon mentioned, there is a link in the chat for the poll. And I want to know how many people actually know what the competencies are for their current position. This could be a list of duties or responsibilities. It could be a job description. It could be what is called competencies in some firms. It may be your annual goals, but it may not be. If your annual goals consist solely of a billable hour threshold or, some very broad categories that aren't going to put you in a position for promotion, then that's probably not the best one. Okay. All right. Looks like we have a lot of answers in. I'm happy to see that such a high percentage understands what's expected of your current level. For those who are responding no to this, I would challenge you to set up a meeting with your manager or to set up a meeting with HR and ask what those competencies are. It's very hard for you to be able to benchmark yourself in your current position if you don't know what's being expected of you. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more on another slide, but we're going to do another poll next. So if we could go to the next slide and please use the same exact link. Please tell me if you understand the competencies for the position you would move to following a promotion. So again, this would be a job description, a list of duties or responsibilities. We're about 75%, so fewer than as I expected. fewer people know what's expected at the next level than they do at the current level. And this is going to be very important. So Shannon, it looks like we have most people in. Why don't we go to the next slide? Thank you, everybody, for responding. So keys to managing your career. First of all, what's very important is that you understand the expectations, okay? So here, you need to be able to benchmark yourself against the expectations that are set for you. If you don't have those key job criteria, then you're not going to be able to assess truly how you're performing at your current level. And the reason why I suggest requesting a job description of the level above you is that sometimes in a job description, there are certain boxes you absolutely have to check to move forward. And sometimes there are some that are a little more flexible. If you can see the job description at the next level, it will be easier for you to identify those that are really critical to master because they're going to serve as building blocks to move up to the next level. Next slide, please.
Sharon, I have a great story on this if I can share.
Absolutely.
I have a peer at WTW who was just amazing at her job, excelling for several years, just doing, everything she could every year, hitting her goals, billable, non-billable, everything required. But she kept getting passed over for a promotion. And every year she was just getting frustrated. I must not be doing enough. I must not be doing enough. And finally, this year, she asked the question, how come I haven't been promoted since I've been doing such a good job? And the response from her manager was, well, you're doing amazingly at your current job. And what I need from you to do is to do amazingly at the next job so we can consider you for promotion. So now that she's aware of what the criteria is, she's on the path to that promotion, and unfortunately lost a couple of years just because she didn't know what the criteria was.
Yeah, absolute. Great point. Great point. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, so as Jim emphasized in the introduction, your progress really should be tracked during the year with regular check-ins with your managers. So, what do you do during those conversations, especially if this is new to not only you, but to your manager, because I think there are a lot of people in that position. So one of the things I recommend, and I work with a lot of direct reports and other folks in our firm, especially those who are newer hires, I think it's really important to assess each quarter how you're doing. And I think it's helpful to make this very formulaic to remove some of the emotion. Women are criticized a lot for being emotional when it comes to, talking about themselves. So, I really recommend that folks at the end of the quarter, while things are fresh in their mind, summarize their assignments that they've completed by client and, assess themselves on how they did from their perspective. And then think about what strengths they demonstrated during the quarter that are critical to their success, whether it's moving up to the next level or being a good team player. And then looking at areas of development or skills that you need to master. If you need more experience with a certain programming, technical program or a certain technical skill, or want more face time with a client that you didn't get this quarter, and that's going to hold you back from meeting your current job requirements or moving up to the next level. It's important to look at that. And I think a lot of times when people do that, it's easy for them to forget some of the things that they think are more intangible, things like pursuing professional credentials, volunteer activities at the firm, such as mentoring a new hire, being an intern buddy, serving on an employee resource group, leading a community service or participating in a community service activity. So it's important as you work each quarter to list all the programs you have taken advantage of to position yourself for success and to help the company grow, and also include things like whether you had a mentoring relationship where you were the mentee, or whether you established or participated in a study group to help you become successful for an exam that was in addition to all your regular job responsibilities. Once you have your quarterly update at the end of quarter one and quarter two, consolidate those together, and it's really time then to look at, from my perspective, your mid-year manager meeting. And I always tell everybody this is the most important meeting you will have all year with your manager, because if you combine your first and second quarter updates, they should show a good picture of what you believe you've accomplished during the year. And I always recommend that someone submit that in advance to their manager about a week early so that your manager has time to look at it, review and reflect on it, and your manager has time to get their thoughts on your performance and perhaps collect feedback from others if you're working for multiple teams or you've been, during that 6-month period, you've been working with others. I think it's important to meet with your manager, and if your manager does not do this, because sometimes managers, you need to manage up, honestly, set a time on the calendar. And I think it's important when you set that time that, you have it either be over lunch or schedule it in a conference room, somewhere where there are going to be no distractions and where you're going to have privacy for honest and direct conversation. This isn't something that they stop by at your desk and say, oh yeah, I read what you wrote down, it was great. If your manager or you are not in the office, if you have a remote working relationship, I really encourage you to set up a Zoom or a Teams meeting where you are both on camera. There is so much nonverbal communication that you missed when you're talking to somebody about something this important, that it really helps to see their faces. So make sure you're on camera and let your manager know you'd really like to be on camera for this conversation. The most important thing for you to establish, I believe, during a mid-year meeting is to get a plan to close those gaps. Like Amy just shared with us, she knew somebody who was getting passed by and they didn't even understand why. So it's a good chance to say, you read what I had. Are we on the same page? What am I missing? I'm interested in being promoted, or I want to get a good rating. Where are the gaps? And I also want to encourage you to look for opportunities. On the right side of the slide, I've talked about developing your career, looking for special projects, building your brand. If people are working late and your workload is manageable right now, saying to them, hey, do you need some help? I have some time. I know you're working late. How can I help you? I may not, maybe you'll pick up a new skill. Maybe there's a special project and you're interested in, raising your hand to see if you can get involved in that, even at some level, proofreading a report, pursuing professional credentials, volunteering. All of those things build your brand, and we're going to talk about how important that is and how important that is to make sure they're reflected in your self-assessment. Next slide, please. Okay, so this brings us to year end. If you haven't done all these steps already, it's going to require a big investment for you to go back through the year and summarize all this information. But once you do, you're really in a great position to use this format in Q1 next year, and you'll find it's a lot easier. Again, highlight your strengths, identify the areas where you still think you have gaps, whether that's to move to the next level or to master the level that you're at. Really critical to submit in advance. And again, I talked about how important it is that, women are sometimes viewed during these conversations that it's easy to get emotional, especially when somebody is trying to provide constructive criticism and it catches you off guard. This is a great framework for you to present your side of the story and get yourself composed and comfortable with your accomplishments so you can talk very, very comfortably about this. And I really think talking about strengths and areas of development is a great starting point for a good dialogue between you and your manager, because you focus on both positives and areas of growth, and you really need both of those to grow your career. Next slide, please. Okay, so writing the self-assessment. I look at a lot of promotion applications. I look at a lot of mid-year assessments. I look at a lot of year-end assessments, and I have definitely noticed a difference, particularly between men and women, on the fact that women tend to use a lot of qualifiers in their assessments, and they highlight their shortfalls, not their accomplishments. So I've just listed on this slide some recommendations for some phrases that you can use. A lot of women will say, well, I trained a new hire. Well, you trained a new hire on that government form. You couldn't have done that if you didn't understand what to do. So let me know. Say you demonstrated mastery of that form by training a new hire to do it. Efficiency, accuracy, minimal guidance, volunteering. Those are all things that tell your story. And You can help your manager tell your story to leadership if you can put those words in. And your manager may not agree with you, but at least give them some words to talk about. They may say, yeah, you know, you said you were really proactive. Here's an example where I want you to be more proactive. And that's okay. At least put it in there, because from your perspective, it tells your story. And if you're not on the same page, it's important to find it out now, you know, more importantly in the mid-year, so you can correct it. But if not, you know, to find it, to recognize how you can get ready for 2023. And on the right side, I feel when you do your self-assessment, print it out and read it and cross out all those words. Cross out all those words that you're questioning yourself. Let your manager question yourself. You know, stand on the good work that you did this year, and do not talk about how you failed exams. Talk about the fact that you're actively pursuing them, despite maybe a workload, heavy workload, despite maybe, you know, some challenges you had in your personal life. You know, let them twist your words and turn it into, I failed, you know, she failed these exams. But, you know, put things in a positive light. Let your manager know that you want to be affirmative in the work that you've done. Next slide, please. I want to talk about promotions. You know, I said at the beginning, you know, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Wayne Gretzky's famous quote, and all the statistics about studies on women applying for positions. A promotion is really an internal job application. So I think a lot of women believe having a conversation with their manager about, hey, am I eligible for promotion? Like, what do I need to do to get promoted? What are you looking for? Or, oh, I haven't checked that one box. I didn't get any special projects this year. You know, I need those. It says I need those to move up. You know, be comfortable asking your manager. I'm interested in being promotion. Then they know you want to move forward. Where are my gaps? Help me. You know, you don't want to be looked over. And, you know, if it's helpful, you know, you've shared your self-assessment, you know, maybe they can use some of that for your promotion application. The ones at our firm are a lot of work. And I appreciate having language that I can use to present, you know, someone in their most unique, positive light to give them the greatest shot to be considered for promotion. So, you know, putting together a self-assessment shows great initiative, it shows great reflection, and it shows you're invested in your career and learning how to progress. Next slide, please. Finally, before I pass this over to Amy, I want to talk about how important it is to build a support network as you grow your career. The Women in Consulting community had a forum at the CCA meeting this fall. They talked about the importance of mentors, allies, coaches, and champions. These are folks who can put forth your name as opportunities arrive, whether within your firm or in the professional, you know, organizations that you may belong to build your brand or to grow your skills or to give you opportunities to prove yourself. And I want to say to everyone out there, don't underestimate that opportunity and the value of those people supporting you. There are limited dollars out there for salary adjustments, for promotions, for bonuses, and employees who have a good brand name, who are well known in the company for investing in the success of themselves, their colleagues, and the company overall, tend to get recognized. It's almost like the squeaky wheel, but these are folks who are, you know, putting themselves out there and volunteering for activities and being well known. So, you know, lean on those coaches, champions, and mentors. Lean on people outside of your manager network to help grow your career, and appreciate those folks. If you don't have them, look out and find them. Let them know you want them to help you on your way. So I'm going to pass this over to Amy now. She's going to talk to you a little bit about feedback.
Thanks, Sharon. So first I want to say, with regard to mentorship, the best way to start a relationship with a mentor is to ask them for feedback, get a conversation going. And over time, you know, that mentor will get to know you and your goals and what you're trying to accomplish, and they can naturally become someone that wants to help you. So consider that as a reframe of feedback. And I say that because what I hear a lot on feedback is that it's a requirement. It's something that I have to do every year end. It is part of my job. Jim says I have to set up a meeting with my manager once a month. There's all this stuff I have to do on top of my job. You know, I would rather not. And I ask that while we go through this, you reframe this to realize that feedback is for you and it is helping you grow your career. And in fact, the more feedback you get, the better you're going to be, because you're going to identify areas for growth a lot quicker than someone who doesn't. So there's a lot of good that comes out of this. And I really hope that if you take one thing out of this section, it's that asking for feedback is something that's really a gift for you. And it's not something for your manager or your practice or just some rote exercise that you need to do. So all that being said, if you want to solicit feedback, what's the best way to do it? So I put together a little quick start guide. In terms of when, and we've talked about this, you want to start early. Asking for feedback just at mid-year and just at the end of the year is going to lead to surprises. And as Jim already mentioned, surprises are generally not a good thing. And so the best way to get ahead of that is to start asking early. That being said, I'm not saying ask about every hour that you spend, poking somebody and saying, how was that hour? I think the best thing to do is to focus on larger projects where you see that you've stretched yourself to see how that area of growth went, and then areas for development that you personally are working on. So if you identify projects like that, those would be the best places to ask for feedback. In terms of who to ask, understanding that not everybody works with a large group of people and you might just be working with your manager, it's best to find as much variety as you possibly can in your feedback providers. So you can be creative. Your feedback provider does not have to be actuarial. They don't have to be technical. There's a lot you can learn from soft skills. And so think about who in your circle that you interact with can give you feedback. You definitely don't want to rely just on your manager, especially in the case where your manager is not working with you every day. Your manager can relay feedback, but the best place to get that is directly from the source. And then also, you want to seek both upward and downward feedback. So upward feedback is the traditional type that we think about. But if you're someone who delegates to others, you really want to get a sense for how your delegation skills are and how you can help grow others, in addition to, kind of the normal feedback of how you can do better at your job. In terms of how, this tends to be a sticking point for people. Like, what do you want me to do? You want me to just say, hey, you can have some feedback? How do I go about this kind of awkward conversation? What I would say is, when you have this call or in-person meeting or lunch, which was a great idea, Sharon, the best way to start is by setting expectations, by making it clear to your feedback provider what you're trying to get out of the conversation. What I find is if you're only asking for general feedback, you're probably not going to get the most substantive response. So you might get something like, oh, you're doing a great job. And what does that do for you, right? Going back to the reframe of how feedback is helping you, hearing that, even if you're a high performer, does not help. And so setting expectations of, out of this conversation, I would like to hear what I'm doing well and what I can do better. And that ensures that you're going to get something out of it that actually helps you. Excuse me. I received a really good email from a junior analyst this year asking me for feedback. In the email, it contained a request for feedback, but also here are the 2 goals that I would really like for you to focus on. And not only here are the 2 goals, but here's how I believe I met those goals this year. And I would really love your commentary on that. So it was very clear. It helps me fill out that feedback because I know exactly how to angle it and exactly what to think about. So something like that, and that was via email. You can do that on a call too if you want real-time feedback. We can go to the next slide. So once you're in that conversation, how can you make sure that you're getting the most out of it? So this is where I think a lot of people might fall into a couple of pitfalls. So I put a little do and don't list here. And what I would say is don't go in with an expectation of what you want your feedback to be. That's where things like surprises and emotional reactions come in. So make sure that you keep your mind open and that you are actively listening. You're not just waiting until they say good job, right? Because again, that's not going to help you grow in your career. In a feedback conversation, one that's productive, you should expect to hear both positive and constructive feedback. That's a good feedback session. So make sure that you hear both of them and you embrace both of them. So this is an equal weight. Okay, you hear good things and that is good. That is something to be celebrated. And so you should internalize them and be able to identify what it is you're doing well. On the other hand, constructive feedback is good. It is to help you. And so where you want to be careful is our human instinct is to anchor on the constructive feedback. But you want to make sure that you've actually heard everything from that conversation. So that brings me to line 3, which is emotional responses. Nobody can expect that you're going to go into a feedback discussion and not have an emotional response. You will either feel happy or you will feel disappointed. Those are all very natural things. But something to think about is, how do you personally react in these situations, and how can you combat it to make sure that you get through the whole conversation, right? So if you know that the positive feedback is going to send you soaring and then you don't hear anything that comes after, you want to actively be thinking about that to make sure that you're present for the rest of the conversation. And on the other hand, if you know that constructive feedback is going to hit you hard, you have to be able to prepare yourself so that you're not going to shut down and, again, maybe miss some really helpful tips on how to grow from that, or anything good that's coming out of the rest of that conversation. So as I mentioned, sometimes feedback discussions are not perfect. And Sharon mentioned this too. Sometimes managers are not perfect. So you might be in a situation where you don't feel that you have fully gotten what you wanted out of that conversation. So what you should be doing is asking clarifying questions. If something was said that you don't understand, you don't have to sit and nod. It is an open discussion. You are welcome to ask for examples, ask clarifying questions. How can I put this into practice? Can you give me a specific way to grow from this? On the other hand, if you leave the room with questions, that might make you stew, and that's not going to be a constructive way to move forward. Another way that conversations can be kind of imperfect is people may make comments that are not necessarily connected to your goals or competencies. One example that often gets thrown around is, you're asking me too many questions. I would rather you just bundle them all up and, have one call with me. Or some people, on the other hand, might say, I would rather you ask me questions in the meantime instead of waiting to have a call with me, which tends to be a work style difference and has absolutely nothing to do with your goals and competencies. So make sure you understand the difference between a comment on your personal goals and a comment on work style and how to work with somebody else or accommodate those styles. And then the other thing is you want to leave with clear action items. So when you come out of a feedback discussion, you should know, what should I keep doing? What should I start doing? And what should I stop doing? Right? And if you don't have those items, I think you need to go back up a couple of lines and ask some clarifying questions. So Jim, Sharon, anything to add there?
That was great, Amy. One thing I would add is, if you've had a conversation and you finish it and there's something that's bothering you or you're uncomfortable about, give yourself 24 hours. Let yourself get some perspective on the conversation. And if it's still bothering you, it's worth a follow-up conversation. And that can start with something as simple as, hey, we had a conversation yesterday. I've been thinking about it. I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about, and be specific and say, could we have 15 minutes or could we have another half an hour? I'm going to put some time on our calendars. Thanks so much for the extra time.
Yeah, that's really important. Thank you for that. So before we go into the next section, which is talking about giving feedback, I want to do a little thought exercise with the group. So I'm going to ask everybody on the call, wherever you are, unless you're driving, close your eyes for a minute. And just picture you're having a very normal day at work. You are in a spreadsheet, typing up an email, really normal day, and you get a pop-up Outlook notification that is an invite from your manager called chat. And there's no other information provided. Okay, now you can open your eyes. And Shannon, if we can move to the word cloud, how did that make you feel? Yes, even actually talking about this experience is causing a little bit of an extra heartbeat for me. I will say I received an IM a couple of weeks ago from someone very high up in my company that said, "Do you have a minute?" And I think I fell out of my chair. I was so nervous. It turned out it wasn't even about me. It was about one of my direct reports, but that kind of threat reaction is so real. So Shannon, I think when this becomes a word cloud, number one is going to be stressed, and maybe number two, anxious.
Yeah, I'm not sure why it's not clouding. It might just be listing.
Yes, but I think it's clear. So everybody has the same human reaction. And I think that's the point. So if we go to the next slide, I just want to briefly touch on the SCARF model. So this is something by a neuroscientist named David Rock. I encourage everybody to look it up. And it talks about the human natural reaction of running away from threats and running toward rewards. And it's something that we can't control within ourselves. It's going to happen. And so the best thing that we can do as feedback providers is to understand that we actually have the power to either create that response in someone or to help avoid it. And so for those who are feedback givers and have that responsibility, just a couple of thoughts on how to mitigate creating that threat response in someone. Number one would be don't send a meeting that says chat, because that made everybody very nervous. Oh, there's the cloud. Wonderful. Anxious, number one. Thanks, Shannon. So the way that SCARF works is it just talks about kind of 5 ways that you relate to others and how that might create either a threat response or a reward response. So number one, consider your position in relation to your audience. If you are extremely high up in a company and you're sending an IM to somebody who is not, just consider what that might evoke in them. The number one thing that I do when putting meetings on calendars with my direct reports is provide a very lengthy explanation of what the meeting is for. So I'll send an IM and I will say, "Hi, do you have time to talk about X, Y, and Z?" Which brings me to bullet number 3, which is allow a little bit of choice in terms of when you have that meeting, how you have that meeting, what order you discuss things in, which it relates a little bit to the autonomy bullet. Make people feel like they have a choice in the matter. Of course, they have to hear your feedback, but it's a question of how, and a lot of people have different perspectives on that. So I met with a group of 4 direct reports, 4 different meetings, and we had an agenda, 4 items, and one of them was feedback. And each of them actually slotted feedback in a different part of the agenda. Some wanted to just get it over with, talk about it at the beginning. Some wanted to just wait until the end and put it off as long as possible. So by allowing that simple flexibility, it gives people a little bit of autonomy. When providing feedback, you want to tap into your desire to help and grow others, right? So your feedback is going to come from a more caring place, and that relatedness comes in, that you want that person to grow, and you're not simply handing down feedback to them. And then lastly, be as transparent as possible. So explain why you're giving the constructive feedback that you're giving and the impact that it has on your teams or you personally. And I think in general, just be as human as you can while giving feedback. So Sharon, Jim, anything to add on giving feedback? All right, thank you. I will turn it over to Jim.
So another important topic as we talk about the year-end process involves discussions about pay. Now, pay transparency itself has become a much more relevant issue recently due to some legislation passed in Colorado and New York around requiring employers to include salaries when they post job listings. Now, pay transparency is one thing. That's where people just have access to information about what a specific job is paid. But the more important aspect of this is pay equity, which is ensuring that two people of similar qualifications are being paid similarly for doing the same job. So pay transparency itself, some increases through legislation and through just a general cultural shift into removing this from being such a taboo topic at work, has led to improvements in pay equity. And I think we're going to see more in the future. Now, we know that this is an uncomfortable conversation for everyone. We don't normally have conversations about pay at work, but I think this is an especially relevant topic for this group because studies have shown that women are less likely to negotiate pay. Women are also less likely to change jobs, which means they're less likely to get real-time market feedback on what an employer might value their job at. Now, we want to give you some tips about having this discussion as you talk with your managers at year end, because that is often when these pay decisions are going to be made. Now, you should be empowered nowadays. Your manager should be prepared to have these discussions, and for your manager to be prepared to justify why you're being paid what you're being paid, and also why you're being paid what you're being paid relative to that salary scale that you might see for a similar job your company's posting in New York or Colorado. So there's a couple of practical tips we've got here to make this conversation a little bit easier. The first is to rehearse beforehand, whether it's by yourself, with a trusted friend, a sponsor, a mentor. Just hearing yourself vocalize these words, asking about pay and understanding how you're being paid can make you more confident and comfortable going into these conversations. Another trap that I think a lot of us fall into is that we're afraid of being perceived negatively when we ask about pay. And I want you to challenge that underlying assumption and shift your mindset to think about this from your company's perspective. It is definitely in their best interest to keep you a productive and happy employee. And one of the easiest ways they can do that is by convincing you that they're paying you fairly. So this is an opportunity for a win-win outcome between you and your manager and you and your employer. It doesn't have to be an adversarial conversation. Another item that can make you feel more confident going into these discussions, especially if you feel like you're being paid less than a similar role in your company, is to look at publicly available data. We've got more sources of data now than we've ever had before, where you can do some external research and potentially come in with having some feelings validated based on how similar roles and experience levels are being paid. And another thing I wanted to make sure you keep in mind as you might approach your manager about this topic is to treat your manager as a partner in this. They want to help you. They might not be able to do everything that you want them to do, but they in general want what's best for you. Again, this doesn't have to be an adversarial conversation. This is an opportunity to foster and build trust between you and your manager and between you and your company's leadership. So while these conversations can be uncomfortable, they are certainly important. And we wanted to encourage you and provide you some information to help potentially have these conversations with your manager at year end. And I think we did pretty good on our timing, and that gets us to our Q&A section.
If you have a question for our panel, you can enter it in either the Q&A or the chat. They're looking at both. So we have about 14 minutes left, so please feel free to submit your question.
Okay, I see one that came through. It says, giving oneself the top rating. Doesn't that look bad? So Sharon, I think this was from your section earlier.
I think the thing to recognize in that is that men are more confident in giving themselves a higher rating than women. So I don't know that I'm suggesting you give yourself the highest rating, but if you had a year where you really knocked it out of the park, don't be afraid to say that. If you had a year where you really believe you did above average, don't rate yourself average and hope your manager pulls it up. Really, I think the message I was trying to share with everybody is that there is a disparity between the way men and women rate themselves. And I think there needs to be more confidence in some of the women on how, when I know I have some women who are my direct reports who have just had an unbelievable year where they have given beyond giving, and then I get their rating and it's like average. And I think, how could that be? So really take a minute and assess yourself. If you had an average year, if you weren't working super long hours or weren't on very stressful projects and kind of, didn't do what you really felt like was the more like you did, was it what was expected and average rating is appropriate, that's great. But if you did more, don't be afraid to say, from my perspective, I feel like I gave a lot and I contributed to the success of this organization.
Yeah, I'll add that I was having a conversation with a relatively junior person, and she was talking about year end and self-assessments. And she said something like, oh, well, I just don't like to play the game. I don't like to play the game. And I poked on that statement a couple of times. And what it turned out to mean was that she was uncomfortable saying anything that she had done well because she felt it was brown nosing or just kind of, trying to look for some compliments, when in reality, like, your career and your performance are at stake here. And it's not playing a game, it's a fact. If you've contributed heavily to something, that's a fact, and you should say it.
Good point. I saw there's another question that came through. It asked if anyone could speak to asking for a promotion and raise and how to handle being denied. I don't know if Amy or Jim, you want to take that?
I was going to mention, yeah, one thing I've seen done that's, I think, very helpful is understanding that if you were denied a promotion, for example, is to ask some clarifying questions. Help you or your employee, if you're a manager, understand exactly why they were passed over for promotion and what they could do next year or in the future to demonstrate that they're ready for promotion. So maybe getting some clarity is one of the recommendations I have there.
Yeah, I would add, so one of my earlier comments about understanding your emotional responses and being able to combat those, because in reality, it's not a personal attack, even though it's going to feel like it. And so internalizing that feeling, feeling that feeling, but then moving on to, okay, what are my action items coming out of this?
Are there any other questions? There will be a recording of this posted on the CCA website in the coming days. Oh, we do have another question.
Any advice for when you receive a raise, but maybe it doesn't match what you were expecting? Or if you aren't sure if you're being underpaid for the position because you aren't sure what the salary range is?
So I have a couple thoughts here. The first one, if you're not sure if you're being underpaid, again, I would emphasize, see if you can ask your manager for that information. Your manager might have access to your salary range for your level with your position. They might not. If they don't, or if you can't find that information internally, I would again suggest looking externally, whether it's researching job listings, or searching for salary data from a website like Glassdoor. There's a lot of different sources out there that you can go to at least give you an idea. It's never going to be precise. There's imperfect data, but it'll give you a sense. I think what is the rest of the question? It disappeared here. yeah, for when you are asking for a raise and it doesn't meet expectations, again, I think like Amy was saying, acknowledge that there might be an emotional response to this and take a beat. Understand that this might not be a personal attack or a personal assessment of your overall value, but maybe there was budgetary concerns and there wasn't enough dollars. I mean, there's never enough dollars to go around, but understand that it might not be a personal decision. But I would also say, make sure if that's the case, that your manager knows that's how you're feeling. Don't be afraid to say, this is less than I was expecting, because that's one of the best ways to align your reality with your manager's expectations and with their leadership's expectations. If you don't feel like you're being paid appropriately, your manager wants to know that. They want to help you. They want to help you grow. They want to be able to tell that to leadership and say, hey, I think this person's got a great case for being paid more than they're being paid right now. Here's why. What can we do to help them?
And your manager should be able to get some information internally as to, what quartile you're in as far as the pay range for your job salary. Try to get some information that, maybe doesn't tell you exactly where your salary falls in the band of folks at your same level, but they should be able to do some research with HR or with leadership and be able to give you a bigger picture as to where your salary falls in. And if you have some external sources that are showing that you don't feel like you're aligned, I think sharing them with your manager is also very helpful.
Any other questions? The Women in Consulting group has a couple upcoming events. The main one is we have a book club that will be starting in February. I'll be posting information about that soon, but the book club is reading The Confidence Code, The Science and Art of Self-Assurance. That seems to kind of go back to this, might be good. And if you are a non-CCA member who wishes to join this community, my email address is at the bottom of the screen. You can email me and I can add you to the community. And it looks like we had one more question come in.
Jim, I think this one's going to be for you too. Is there an advantage to responding to recruiters, even if you're happy with your current job, to go back to your manager and say, hey, look what XYZ is offering me?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I don't know if a recruiter is going to be able to tell you any specific information, at that point of, hey, without any other context, come on over to our company and we'll pay you twice what you're paying now. I don't think that's going to be treated as a really realistic offer or scenario for your manager to be able to say, oh, well, of course, then we should match what this random recruiter who's reached out to you one time has said. I will say there is a value for understanding market values of your role, though. I mean, if this is a serious consideration, if you are, looking at external sources, if you have a friend who works for another company who's at the same level you are, and for a fact that they're getting paid more, like that's more relevant information, I would think, than, a one-off conversation with a recruiter.
And I think it's also important to understand the whole story of that position. Is it going to require working longer hours? Is it going to involve a commute when you're working remotely, or you're remote and you can't, you have to understand, I think, the big picture of that. That it isn't just salary. Maybe benefits are stronger also. Maybe they're not as strong. Maybe there's a give and go that when you look at the whole package. I think sometimes we do get caught up on salary and we forget that there are other pieces that are equally as important when assessing whether a different role is right or not. And I don't mean to imply salary isn't important. I do believe it is, but sometimes the big picture is important to understand too when you're gathering the facts, to go to your manager and say, look at what they're offering me,
We have time for one final question if there are any others. Otherwise, I'd like to thank our presenters today for this presentation. We greatly appreciate it. It was very, very good and very enlightening. Any other questions?
Good luck to everybody on your self-assessments, and wishing you a very positive year-end experience and a great plan for 2023.
Second that.